So classically, insurgents have always tended to hide where there's good cover and there's limited government presence. And traditionally, that has been jungles, mountains, sometimes deserts. With the increase in surveillance, with improvements in things like satellites and ISR assets that are airborne and so on, but also with the pattern of urbanization that we're seeing in a lot of the planet, increasingly the cover is actually in the cities, not necessarily in the downtown area, but in the sort of peri-urban, the belts of terrain around the outsides of cities. And so one of the things we're seeing with insurgency is that increasingly it's becoming a phenomenon of insurgents exploiting and manipulating populations that live on the edge of cities and using them as a way to, if you like, cut off and strangle government by isolating it from the rest of the country. So we've seen this in Latin America, we've seen it in Afghanistan, we've seen it, of course, in Iraq and the Middle East, and to some extent we've seen it in Africa as well. One of the ideas that I think is increasingly important in the world of insurgency and guerrilla warfare is this idea of conflict entrepreneurs. So this is an idea that comes out of the Civil War literature, but we've seen increasingly evident in insurgencies in Africa in particular and in Latin America, where people that may be engaging in insurgency are not necessarily fighting for geopolitical outcomes, and once they achieve victory, they're looking for a favorable peace. They may be fighting in order to preserve the conflict precisely because they get profit or political status or some kind of other benefit from the existence of a fight. And so we call those people conflict entrepreneurs. And in many cases, you see conflict entrepreneurs creating partnerships with organized crime, illicit networks, people smuggling, drug smuggling, cigarette smuggling in some parts of North Africa. And it's a way of, it's almost war as a business, generating the sort of long-term benefits for a community or an individual entrepreneur based on the existence of conflict. Now, yeah, no, I mean, security is the foundation for everything else in a counterinsurgency environment. If you can't provide security, it doesn't really matter how good your governance and development programs are, because they'll never be executed because there's no security. And I think that it's really important to create what I call a self-securing population, a population that's able to be secure even if there is no military presence right on their environment. So initially the military will go in and will clear the insurgent out of an area. And there's a tendency to sort of think that that's the end of the problem, right? We've cleared the enemy away, everything's fine now, we can leave. But what of course happens is the military goes into an area, they bring presence, people in the community work with the military and work with the government and expose themselves. And then when the military leaves, those people are then vulnerable to being killed or coerced by the insurgents who come back when the troops leave. And so it's really important to go in there to clear the enemy out, but then to begin developing a community resiliency program or community security programs that can make people safe in the event that you have to go to the next village or somewhere else. And even if you're only a village away, it could still take half an hour or an hour for you to get back and provide security. And in that time, a whole village can be killed. So I think we often talk about clear, hold, and build. It's really important that the military understands that its job is not just to clear the insurgency away from a particular area, but it's also to create the conditions within which the community itself can build the kinds of community security councils and local police and reporting networks and the sorts of things that are needed to make that population self-securing. There are many examples of local militias and local clan military forces have been created in Africa, but also elsewhere. Generally, they've been quite negative in terms of their outcome on the civil population. The positive examples that we've seen in places like Afghanistan, but also in Iraq during the surge, during that so-called awakening, the Sahwa, is where you've got a civil authority, whether it be the provincial government or whether it just be a local informal council of elders or members of the community that exercises some kind of civilian control over the local security force. In Syria, as an example, local governance councils were created in most of the areas that were liberated from the Assad regime. Very quickly, those councils discovered that they needed to have some kind of police force or some kind of security element in order to preserve their control and freedom in a given area. But when the security forces escape from the control of the civil society, that's when you get paramilitaries and clan militias and so on. So I think my focus from a civil society standpoint would be on creating community security councils, which have a police and a military presence, but also have leadership coming from within the community that can ensure that anything that's done in the name of local security, that the population has a say over that and that there's some legitimate input into that. If I was focusing on it from a military standpoint, I think that actually what you need here is not so much military units capable of defeating the insurgency. You need local government administrators capable of creating a resilient structure that works at the province or district level or at the village level in an environment where there's an insurgency operating. And so that's about having the personnel and the vehicles and the management systems and the budgetary systems and the ability to self-protect and move around without relying on the military. That enables the civil government to function.